And what had been a very, very noisy and active area here in Nachlaot with lots of building, it got very quiet. I decided I had to come home early. Came home on October 26th, 2000, and began with a volunteer friend, a Christian guy who was studying here together with Dave. We just began to start doing some of the work ourselves. It was on October 29th, we were working, and I don't know, like 11 o'clock in the morning, boom, we hear a huge explosion, and we look up, and there are pieces of burning metal that are coming over the buildings over here, landing right near us. It was a huge car bomb. That actually, we found out later, they had tried to get into the marketplace, but it failed a few times, and then they parked the car here in our neighborhood and ran. And we ran over there, and two people were killed who had just happened to be walking by, and fumes of black smoke and terrible. And we saw a lot of things like that in those 2 years. But that was the beginning of what became a big adventure, epic story of how this place got built. So I got involved. I began to learn. I began to buy some of the tools. I had been in China learning Chinese. It turns out there were Chinese workers here building a building nearby who would work until 4 in the afternoon and then have dinner and then come over here, and we would work till 11 o'clock at night. And different, okay, the deal that I had with the bank, the idea was that I was going to build, and within 2 years, finish the 3 apartments, the 3 units, sell one of them, and return the loan, which I'd only been paying interest on. Well, those plans were not going to come to pass. 2 years had already passed, and this place was maybe 30 or 40% done, and I was out of money. I'll never forget the day. It was in 2002. I realized I can't go to any bank. I can't pull out any money. This is the first time in my life this has ever happened. I grew up in a decent family that I was always provided for. I didn't have to take college loans and university loans. My parents paid for that. I've got zero money. This project is about 40% finished, which means there's another $400,000 or $500,000 worth of work to do and things to buy to see it finished. And so now, instead of believing for 10%, I've got to believe for 50 or 60%. I'll never forget the first day. It was a Sunday after I had spent whatever money I had on some food for the Sabbath and for some of the workers. And I thought, well, I can go to, there was a ministry with their headquarters just a few minutes away that gives some loans, small-term loans, 1,000 shekels or something to believers who are in need. I thought, I'll go there, see if I can get some money just for food. I'm walking out the corner of this neighborhood, and I hear from the window, psst, psst, hey, Ariel. It's this woman named Panina, and a woman in her 80s who was in a wheelchair. She would be in the park in front of my house. I'd helped her, talk to her sometimes. She says, psst, psst, come here, come into the courtyard. I come into the courtyard, and she comes out with a big pot of what we call in Hebrew or Yiddish, I'm not sure what language, chunt, which is this long cooked, the Orthodox, you don't light a flame or turn off a flame on the Sabbath, so they have these sort of heating elements or heating stoves that just are kept on a low flame, and you cook things overnight for 12, 14 hours, chicken and beef and potatoes and eggs and whatever. It's just sort of this big stew that's been cooked in. It was like half of this thing was left over from Shabbat, and she said, here, it's for you. I thought, wow, I felt like Elijah the prophet, this old lady providing miraculously for me. That food lasted me 3 or 4 days. I put it in the refrigerator, of course, and took it out and heated it up, but it was stick to your ribs, really good food. And I just began to pray, and one by one, things began to happen. I took some time, about 3 or 4 weeks of kind of a sabbatical, went a lot to a place called Sukkot Hallel. Some dear friends of ours that spent a lot of time in worship and prayer watches there, just resting and saying, okay, God, unless the Lord builds the house. I said that verse 1,000 times. I was camping here in this concrete shell of a building just to make sure nothing more was going to be stolen. And with the explosions and the terror and all the fear, I was tired. But after about 4 weeks, I remember I was in a prayer watch, and suddenly I'm trying to worship, and I start thinking about I got to do this. I got to build this. I need this. All these thoughts started coming back to me. I said, okay, this is the time. The anointing for building is coming back to me. I come home that day, come back to the building, and there's this guy standing outside the building who I recognize, and he's looking, he's saying, Ariel. It was a friend from Canada named Bruce. And he said, Ariel, I was back in Canada, I heard you got stuck here, you need help building. You know, I used to be a builder in Canada. I said, really? He said, yeah, what needs to be done? So we sit down, we start talking. He said, okay, let's make a list. We'll do this, we'll do that. I'm going to go to this congregation, that congregation. We need some people, we need some volunteers. I'm going to help. I just went, wow. Well, within about 2 or 3 weeks, Baruch had gathered this sort of motley crew of volunteers, some Christians who were living here, studying here, who needed a place to stay. We finished 1 floor so people could live. He even brought one guy who, I'll never forget, he brought him back and he said, hey, Ariel, here's Thomas. And he's a chef, a professional chef. He used to be a chef at the Sheraton Hotel in somewhere in North Carolina. And I thought, that's just what I need, a professional chef. We're camping in a concrete shell of a building. I don't have any money, and we're building. He says, yeah, and also his father was an electrician, and he grew up helping his father do lots of wiring. I thought, oh, that's interesting. Well, Thomas came on the crew. We had a crew of about 6 or 8 people, some amazing people. And guess what? This Thomas, we could go to the shuk, to the marketplace at the end of the day and buy for nothing, almost nothing, whatever was left over, whatever vegetables, and you'd bring it home. And Thomas, after a day of working, his way of relaxing was cooking for 10 people and making magic out of whatever we could find at the shuk. So we were living, and I was feeding people, a crew of people like that, for 60 shekels a day. Yeah, and so as the Lord began to send people, this really became an example of the one new man, which is a big part of our life and ministry, and the book that I wrote, and a lot of the teaching about how God is the mystery of bringing Jew and Gentile together for reconciliation, for his kingdom, this whole paradigm. And it was amazing to see how many different people came, some from the United States, some from China, I mentioned, also friends from Japan and other places. And it was like at key times, the Lord would send the right people who had some ability in stonework, for example. Forrest, a young man from Minnesota who came. Lori and Jerry, a couple from Wisconsin who had built their own home several times and were just a salt of the earth kind of people. And so it's like in the very stonework, in the very tile work of this building is a testimony of that one new man, of the cooperation between Jew and Gentile. Later on, really towards the very end, even the tile right here that's under our feet was done by myself and Yuval Yanai, who, our dear brother and partner who now runs Revive Israel out at Yad HaShmona. And he was a brand new believer who had just come back from Cyprus, and he stayed here with me, and we worked together and built together. He was an energetic guy. So it was just this beautiful tapestry of way that God put things together. I mentioned earlier the Chinese workers. How did I find them? There was a church on Friday night at the Finnish school here. There was a Chinese service, and I learned a little bit of Chinese in 4 months in Beijing. And I went to this service, and I met Brother Wang, who was building, he and his crew were building this building. We became very friendly, and they started coming here and working. And, my Chinese at that time, I could barely, say hello or order something at a restaurant, but I could say that the tile is not straight or pelis or level, and that, I learned all these different words in Chinese for building. And one day, I remember someone knocked on the door. It wasn't really a door, it was a piece of sheet metal just covering the gate. And he said to me, are you're Blumenthal? And I said, yeah. He said, you're a builder, right? I said, well, sort of, yeah, why do you ask? He said, because there's no workers. I can't get anything done because of the intifada and all the closures. He said, I hear you have a crew of Chinese workers. I have a house out there at and I need 200 square meters of floor tiled. I said, oh, and I had invested in the tools. So myself and Brother Wong and his crew, in addition, we also started taking some jobs. I remember thinking to myself, wow, how did this happen? The last time I built anything was with Legos, okay? But I learned enough of the trade to oversee some work with the experts, for example, in floor tile. And to this day, it's paying dividends as we set out and expand the whole vision of Isaiah 58:12, and what we call Zion Foundations. And we were working, and the Lord kept on saying to me, I was in a hurry. I was at pressure. I'm a goal-oriented guy. I want to get this project finished. And God kept on saying to me, you take care of these people. You feed my sheep, and I'll finish the building. Right? Unless the Lord builds the house, they who labor, labor in vain. And slowly it began to grow and things were getting done. And we had to take on another Arab crew from East Jerusalem to do the stonework. Funds, money, I don't have time to tell the story today. Some miraculous stories of funding, which were really amazing. That things that were just totally unexpected came in just in the right time and time again, the right people, the right money, the right everything. And by 2004, Hevruta was finished, and it was ready to be lived in. So I learned, someday I want to write a book about this, the building of Hevruta, because it's like a parable, the different lessons. The lessons, of course, of trusting God. The lessons of putting the kingdom first and putting people first, of building up people, and God takes care of the work. And then that verse, unless the Lord builds the house, it's true for whatever we're doing, whatever ministry we're in, physical things, spiritual things. It's His work. We're partnering with Him, and we're following Him. And it's not by might, not by power, but by His Spirit. There's a lot of work that we did. We woke up early. There was a lot of sweat, a lot of effort that went into it. But there was grace on the whole thing. And that was really fulfilling that verse that the Lord had spoken to me from Isaiah 58:12 so many years before in Japan. Those from among you will rebuild the ancient ruins. These were ancient. They weren't ancient. They were about 150-year-old ruins. Okay? It's part of Hevruta, and this house is really kind of an anchor for us, for our vision of what we want to see happen here in downtown Jerusalem, which includes real estate, which includes other apartments, and we've stepped out into some of these areas of real estate investment and rentals and a B&B business that is growing. And we want to see these streets to dwell in. We want to see Jews and Christians together, living, sharing, visiting here in downtown Jerusalem, living and praying and doing exactly what they were doing in Acts chapter 2. And this is the place, Hevruta is where it all sort of emerges from. This is the lowest apartment down in a half basement level, just on top of that cella, on top of that very, very firm bedrock. And we hope you'll be praying with us, for everything that's happening here, and that you will come and visit. God bless you.